Well, I didn't do anything last week. Great, isn't it? Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me doing the weekly Navel-Gazing, where we talk about all the books I read last week and all the videos I didn't make last week and all about the stuff that I plan to do this week, and then I usually descend into some form of rambling, which, you know, it's fun, I suspect, right? Yeah, let's start with the reading, because I did read some, but not a lot for, you know, reasons that I mentioned last time around. I did finish, of course, Greater Gotham by Michael Wallace, that's his name, and it's another very detailed history of New York City from 1899 to 1919, and it is full of data, full of interesting data points, but not exactly good at sort of like having a larger narrative, which is, you know, something they acknowledged like in the first part in Just Gotham, how it's kind of difficult to do that, and I understand that. I don't necessarily think these are really helpful books beyond, you know, being, say, a researcher. If you're trying to write a history, like a fantasy book or a fiction book, a historical fiction, whatever, about New York City, this kind of book is really helpful because you can pick out and tease out interesting bits and pieces that you can then drop into your story because, yeah, they're full of, like, fun anecdotes and stuff like that. But for, like, larger sort of, like, looks at history, you kind of need some form of a narrative. At least that's something I feel most historians up to a point, or historiographers at this point, kind of agree on, or, well, not agreed on, but at least acknowledge in that, we frame stuff in narratives. That's just like how we do that, and that can be more helpful because you can, you know, have a thesis go, well, this is not just like, hey, this is New York that happened. It's more like, hey, there are forces that made New York this kind of place, for example. And the book is kind of lacking that, which is a bit of a problem. But beyond that, certainly highly entertaining. And then I did, in fact, start The Deluge by Stephen Markley. And I'm a good deal through it by now. And it's an excellent book. Now, I've read some other climate fiction in the past, so I guess it's kind of difficult for me not to compare it to stuff like, say, Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. I think that's probably the best comparison in a lot of ways. Like, they have, like, similar approaches to what they're doing, by which I mean they start in more or less the present and then move further and further into the future, looking at people trying to maybe make this world not completely fucked up. And we'll see where this one goes. So far, it's certainly much more violent in a lot of ways, much more urgent in a lot of ways than Kim Stanley Robinson's ones. It's also a much better book in that the characters are interesting, something of a big problem with Ministry for the Future, where, like, the personal character arcs are just not really interesting at all. It's much more about, like, looking at policies and stuff. So, interesting book so far, and yeah, I can't wait to see where the whole thing finishes, because there's some big questions to answer here, like whether, you know, actually electoral politics will help us to solve the climate crisis in one way or another, or at least mitigate the damage, or whether, you know, eco-terrorism might be a better approach, or maybe something in between. And those will be interesting questions that all of these books, up to a point, have to wrestle with. Obviously, you know, some people failed at doing that, those being, you know, people like Neil Stephenson, who go fully, hey, what if a really brilliant billionaire would just, like, do the thing? And I understand why someone like Stephenson went down that road, which is usually because he's fascinated by ideas and tech, and I get it. It's a nerdy thing. I like that. Totally understand it, but, like, maybe that's not how we solve a global problem. But so I'm interested to see where Stephen Markley is going. That's all I read, because, well, I went hiking for, like, hiking for one day, and then hanging out and partying and whatever, and camping for, like, another day, and it doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of reading, and both Gotham and The Deluge are pretty massive fucking books, right? The audiobook for one of them is like 54 hours, and the other one is like 40 hours, which is both, like, somewhere around the 1,000 page kind of thing. We're talking Molas and Stormlight levels of length here, so yeah, takes time is what I'm saying. But I'm definitely going to finish The Deluge very soon, probably tomorrow or the day after, that being Wednesday, I guess. And I guess I kind of know what I want to read after that. Because right after The Deluge, which came out in 2022, I want to read Malcolm Harris's new book, What's Left, ways, paths, whatever, out of the global climate crisis. And it's a non-fiction book about what we could maybe do to make things slightly less fucked up. And I want to see how those two kind of map onto each other or kind of intersect and deal with similar ideas in obviously very different approaches. One of them being, a non-fiction book, and the other one very much being a fiction book looking at like individual lives and fates and so forth within the global crisis, where the other one is probably more about, possible actions we could take in the way that I think, that's sort of like the thing that, say, Kim Stanley Robinson wrestled with in Ministry of the Future, where he was focusing a lot on like policies and kind of neglected the more like personal aspects in at least some parts of the story. So I think that's just interesting to see in that regard. So that's what I will be reading next, and hopefully that will lead to me talking about that in one form or another, in possibly what you might call a video or something, right? So that's what I'm going to be reading next. After that, I don't know. Yes, The Starless Sea will be read this month. I can say that because I do now know when our offline book club will meet. So by the 26th or something of June, I will have to read or have read The Starless Sea. So that will happen probably next week, but right now it just doesn't appeal to me. So I'll probably do that like very much last minute. So for now, it's going to be finishing The Deluge and then reading what's left, and then we'll see what else I can, what else grabs my fancy, if it does, because there might be chances of me once again having not too much time, what with, stuff happening and life and all of that. So that's the reading plans. Obviously, if you have some other ideas of what I should read, one of the things that I want to read is, of course, the new Tochi Onyebuchi one that came out last week, I think. But I'll have to wait for Audible credits and stuff to get to that. But that's certainly something I want to read very, very soon. And there is 10 Incarnations of Rebellion or Revolution by I keep forgetting the author's name. I'm blanking on it right now. But that one sounds really interesting as once again, post-colonial fiction set in India. So I'm definitely eyeing that one. And we will see, possibly also next week or so. We will find out. But what about videos? Well, I didn't make any, as you may have noticed. Once again, I was away from most of Wednesday. I was then from Thursday until Saturday, basically, and then also all of Sunday I was not at home, and that does not necessarily lead to lots of times where I record videos, does it? So no videos last week. Obviously, also I did not finish any books that were worth talking about in detail. So there we are. But I do plan to make a video this week, probably about The Deluge, possibly adding in what I learned from Malcolm Harris's What's Left. Or maybe I'll realize that those two books are worth each one of each a video of their own, so I can sort of combine conversations about them or better separate those different approaches and maybe compare them or whatever. That might also be a way of doing that. I'll find out once I'm done with the first book and the second book, but that's a plan for a video this week. Possibly something else if I have an idea. Who knows? There is the usual sort of stuff floating around on the booktube-ish kind of sphere, where people talk about how no one's reading anymore, or how men are not reading anymore, and how everything is bad. And I will return to that final part of the anti-intellectualism kind of thing where we talk about book talk and so forth, but that takes research. That takes me actually reading academic texts, which takes time, which I haven't actually spent on it this week. So that's certainly something that we will hopefully, find out more about in the next week or two. So I have probably 2 weeks of reading academic texts, and then that will hopefully be enough for me to structure the video and record it. So that's something I want to get done this month, but I don't know when. So, but, maybe just yelling about the whole oh, there's no more books for men or whatever stuff. Maybe that might be worth a smaller, separate kind of video, because it's, yeah, I mean, Joe Byrne did a really interesting book on video on trying to explain what masculine books or books for men or whatever you want to call it are. And I think it's worth reading that, watching that video. Highly recommend it. I'll just link it down below. my issues are obviously different ones, because I'm usually looking at, like, why are people claiming that there are no books for men when clearly there are a lot of books for men, and there have always been a lot of books for men. So, maybe that's worth something. The usual kind of stuff that is always sort of like on the borders of booktube or bookish content, where people talk about stuff. Usually, I'll, on like a more meta level, maybe I'll find something that makes me angry, and usually that's a good motivator for me to actually sit down and yell at the camera for a while. But I don't know. So that's sort of like where I am video plan-wise this week, which, is frustrating, because I talked about that like last week. It's like whenever I don't make any videos in like a week, I feel bad about that. But on the other hand, I don't feel like making content that I can't, stand behind and go like, well, this is clearly worth talking about. I want to talk about this right now. I'm not just doing this to keep everyone happy. That's not like an approach that I can do. So I'm always sort of like in this weird place where I struggle with my abilities, where I struggle with or like the feeling of confidence, or even like, I don't want to say self-worth, because that's like, sounds so great, but like, or grand, I guess. But that whole idea of like, should I make this? Am I qualified to make this? Am I not qualified to make this? There's certainly always situations where people question my qualifications, not just, on BookTube, but like in general life. And I'm certainly at the forefront of that usually, unless I'm, I am very much convinced of my abilities in a specific field or whatever, which, ties back to like the amount of like research I sometimes do, or reading I do for like some of these videos, right? Like that Sanderson video that we're still talking about, like the Mormonism video, right? I've read like almost 30 books by now on Mormonism, because I want to get it right. And at this point, I do feel relatively confident that I can do this in a qualified way, but it took a long time, and a lot of other people would probably be satisfied with less, and rightly so, because, there's only so much you can condense into like a 3-hour video or like 2-hour video or whatever, right? There are limits of how much you really need to read for a video like this. Well, not this one, but like any of the others, right? There are limits of that. Anything beyond that is something you would have to use for, say, if you're trying to publish this as an academic paper, as a master's thesis or a bachelor's thesis, right? When you need to get your citations right, when you need to get like all your literature in order, when like every claim you make in a video needs to, in your text, needs to have like a citation going, like, well, this is rooted to this and so forth. That's a different thing, right? We're not doing academia on here, but I try to, inform where I can, and I try to make sure I get my information correct, but those are different levels of expectation or qualification in a lot of ways, and I'm very often kind of struggling with like getting those two separated, because I am very insecure about my qualifications, always will be, can't help that. So that's certainly been eating at me, the fact that I, like, the last week, 2 weeks, really failed at like focusing on like the research for like any of the videos. Like I know that I need to do that, but life's been, all over the place. Obviously not being at home a lot, with like all the travels and all of that kind of stuff doesn't exactly make it easier, but it also means like I go to like a festival, right? I go to this hiking thing or whatever. I usually take like a day or whatever afterwards to slowly come down again and like adjust mentally so I can focus on my reading. I don't want to blame that on anything. Certainly the fact that for like, my usual finance reasons, I could not afford my ADHD medication for the last week certainly didn't help. New month now, so I could get it today, so I'm hopefully this will get easier again, but there is that sort of health, exhaustion, mental health, physical health, whatever, cost to like everything we do, right? Where engaging with friends for like 3 days is amazing, but after that I have like, I'm very much over-socialized in a lot of ways and need to sort of come back to a point where I can sit down and read like an academic essay for a while. It's hard, it's difficult. So the question is usually, what can I do sort of to make things entertaining? Obviously I could probably do some live streams, because those don't necessarily take like a lot of preparation in a lot of ways, and we can talk about books and possibly, you know, the more like politics, history, whatever stuff, because so much stuff is going on these days that it's kind of difficult to to sort of like not speak about that. But also, I mean, this is not a politics news show, right? These are technically books, videos about books, and videos about stuff where I talk about books on like a meta level where I add information. That's a different thing. But like live streams are like more casual in that regard, and you can talk about sort of like the human experience of living through the world that we live through right now in a way that I feel like videos don't necessarily do. So I could probably just do more live streams over the like weeks if I, you know, stay at home or over a weekend, because I usually don't want to just do live streams midweek. I feel the trouble there is that with my audience, you guys being spread out all over the place, but heavily North America and Australia for some reason, means that we're in very different time zones. So if I sit down like 8 in the evening for me, that's like your afternoon. And I assume most of you have like lives that don't allow you to watch like live streams at like 2 p.m. or whatever. That's just not in the cards for you guys. So the weekend is usually like a better way of doing that, because it allows people, hopefully, you know, to watch earlier, or people in my time zone to stay up later because they don't have to go to work the next day. That's like why Fridays and specifically like Saturdays are such good days for live streaming for me, I think. But it is sort of like a question where I'm like, I've been not exactly active here for the last 2 weeks, and that can be a long time in this, you know, wonderful social media world that we're living in, where unless you do something every day, people forget about you because there's so much other stuff going on, right? So those are certainly things I worry about in sort of like my weaker moments, and the last 2 weeks have certainly had some of those moments. Obviously, I also had some amazing, you know, moments, don't get me wrong, but that self-doubt is currently gnawing at me more than it has in a while. And yeah, I don't know what to do about that. It's difficult, is what it is. But and then you look at like the time and I'm like, holy shit, this is like already June. What happened? Year's almost halfway over, right? I should probably get something started if I want to do something this year in any way, shape, or form. And that's like another thing that I'm certainly struggling with, this idea of like, who am I? Am I going to do something with my life or not, right? And don't get me wrong, like I'm happy with doing the YouTube stuff here. That's certainly something I enjoy. It's not exactly paying enough to be called a job, up to a point, although it obviously takes already like a lot of time and effort and so forth. We've been talking about that in the past, right? But this idea of what else to do with my life is a very, very interesting or frustrating one at the moment, because I am in a situation where I can subsist fairly well. Well, not super well, but I can subsist and live, pay my rent, pay the rent, pay my daily bills and everything. If I just do nothing, I can't actually invest in anything because I still have outstanding debts that I have to pay before I have like full access to my bank account again. That will take for fucking ever, because the money that I get these days is not enough to, you know, pay that off in like a month or 2 or 3. It's more like a year or 2 or 3. And at the same time, the kinds of jobs I could maybe get at the moment with my weirdly problematic like skill set, which is unfortunately like very badly distributed. If I were like an RPG character, holy shit, I would absolutely start over, because I did very much invest in the wrong kind of skills, right? But here we are. So I'm in this situation, like I can do nothing and just keep doing the things that I'm doing right now, and it'll be fine. I won't be able to do anything like change my way in like my life in like any dramatic way. I'm just like stuck in this sort of like wheel for now, and I can't really get out of that. And the chances of having like something that would like, you know, dramatically sort of like change my financial system situation, allow me to pay off the outstanding debts and do whatever else, right? the chances of actually that happening are very, very slim. And that's sort of like this sort of eternal sort of like grind, because if, you know, in my head, I always have this like, well, but if the YouTube thing would actually pan out, and I would make money on the YouTube, that could be sort of like a way of slowly getting out of this situation, because it's additional income. It's not a lot, right? But what if that were like more, and what if? And that's usually where the whole like, well, but that would mean compromising, right? That would mean making different content. That would mean paying attention to all kinds of other stuff around the YouTube thing, being more fucking professional about it, I guess. And professional doesn't necessarily mean keeping my integrity. And you see where I'm coming from, right? It's this weird sort of place where I'm in, where I feel that I can't do much, but not doing anything leaves me feeling like inadequate, I guess. and you tie all of these kind of things together, like, you know, personal stuff and moments where your disability kind of comes up in ways that is frustrating or whatever. And you reach that point where it's very easy to fall into like a very, very dark hole, and I'm trying to not do that. But it's been a rough week or two, I guess, in that regard, for all kinds of reasons. So I hope that I'll get at least the Deluge and What's Left video or videos out this week, so I don't feel as useless. That would be really nice. And maybe I'll actually get started on something like, you know, actual research and structuring for the next larger video project. That also would be nice. On the other hand, there's like Rock Hard Festival at the end of the week, so who knows? Maybe that won't happen, because it's also summer and rock and roll stuff and all of that, so who knows? What can I say? It's been a interesting few weeks, I guess. I hope yours have not just been interesting, but like in a good way, and you actually read cool books, and you watched cool movies, and you listened to cool music, and you're planning to do really cool things, and life is not just like messy, but like also like positive and optimistic and so forth. I really hope that's the case for you. I want to say thank you for watching these ramblings, for not getting too mad at me for not having like any videos out in the last 2 weeks. Yeah, just for sticking with me. I really appreciate that. Thank you so very much for that. Like, subscribe, comment if you feel like it. I do appreciate that as well. It certainly does supposedly help with the algorithm and all of those kind of things. There are ways of giving me money if you feel like it, but in the world right now, I feel bad asking, because shit's expensive enough as it is. You don't need to, you know, do any of that as well. But like, you know, liking, subscribing might actually work. Who knows? Anyway, I'll talk to you about something else, possibly climate change, which is a fun topic, right? So that will be cool. And until then, thanks and cheers.